Take a wild guess which state has 7 of the top 10 most polluted cities in America. Did anyone guess California? Ironically, that is the state with some of the toughest and most expensive green laws in America. So, John, you say this is proof that all those global warming regulations aren't worth the cost.
Of course they're a waste. You can't legislate a clean environment any more than you can legislate morality. A clean environment is an effect of a prosperous society. When people are well-to-do, they have the time to care about the world around them. So if you want to clean up the environment, reduce the governmental barriers to prosperity, and you'll get the clean environment.
Well, let's ask a Californian. Rich Karlgaard, you're in California. It was surprising to you, was it not, to see 7 of the most polluted cities were from your state?
Well, John makes a point. In the Central Valley of California, where most of the top ones are, is desperately poor right now, a lot because regulations have wrecked the agricultural industry, at least hurt it. But I will say this, when I came out to California in the 70s, the whole entire L.A. basin smelled like the tailpipe of your car, and it is significantly better, and it didn't happen by accident.
But, Mike, there's something in economics called the law of diminishing returns. At first, I think Rich is right. In the 70s and 80s, you needed pollution controls, but eventually these government agencies become so big they feed on themselves. They only exist to employ the bureaucrats.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at something like the paint care program in California, David, that makes sense, right? Paint manufacturers recycle the consumer's paint so it doesn't get dumped. Great. But then they go overboard and they stop the building of water storage tanks, right? So they have a drought. They're in big trouble. That's when they go too far. There's got to be a happy ground here, and they've gone way, way too far over the years.
And Emacs, sometimes these government agencies cause problems they're meant to prevent, like that Animas River spill a little while ago that was caused essentially by the EPA.
Yeah, and by the way, the EPA is basically being used as a cudgel by the White House via the Clean Water Act. Unelected bureaucrats really slamming, the little guy across the country at a time when the EPA, watch this, spent $160 million in waste, including $144 million in bonuses and trophies that they gave themselves since 2007.
And Sabrina, the overall cost of the EPA, by the way, has been put together. Yeah. EPA regs cost in 2015 are expected to cost $386 billion. That's a huge chunk of our economy.
It is, and I think, David, the devil is in the details, because of course we all want a clean environment, but we have to ask ourselves at what cost. And I think when you look at some of the regulations that California has passed, and these stories are always about my home state. Why is that? But when you look at some of the regulations, a few years ago they passed this gas vapor emissions bill. It had a tiny impact on the environment, but it had a huge impact on all these small gas stations, these family-owned businesses. So we have to ask ourselves at what cost, and is it actually going to have an impact, or the desired impact?
So, Bill, are these regs worth it? They cost almost $400 billion a year. Are they worth it?
I'm not going to defend all the regs, but I'm wondering if some of the free market zealots on this show have gone overboard a bit here. John, I've got a question for you. If your factory stinks up my air, why would a free market motivate you to do anything about it?
There's a question. John, answer it. Go ahead.
That's a great point.
Well, the free market would motivate it, because if you are fouling up the air, you are going to lose business. And I want to talk about Los Angeles.
Really, from Little Bill Baldwin?
I grew up in Los Angeles.
Let John finish his point. Go ahead, John.
I grew up in Los Angeles in the 1970s, and people weren't rushing there from around the country because it smelled like a tailpipe. But let's point out they came out there because it was prosperous. And what did we get from that? We have all sorts of Sierra clubs and junior leagues in Los Angeles fixing it. They don't have them in poor places like Bangladesh.
It was the development. It was the development, as John is saying, of Los Angeles that ironically was part of the reason it got cleaned up. But now these bureaucracies have remained, and they're just useless.
Yeah, I think that's a point that most of us are making here, is that there are diminishing returns. I just want to say that I think all political bills coming out of Washington these days can be called gas emissions, vapor emissions bill. It's all gases today.
Do a cap and trade in Washington, D.C. rhetoric.
Right.
But I am for cleaning up pollution. I think it's awful.
That is the last word. The Cash It In gang, by the way, getting ready to roll at the bottom of the hour. Eric, what do you got?
Hey, David, most Democratic presidential candidates answering Black Lives Matter over All Lives Matter. Is that a good message from a potential president of all Americans? Plus, Donald Trump saying he should get Secret Service protection, and that was before this violence at one of his rallies. Should taxpayers pay to protect presidential candidates? See you at 11:30.
Good questions. Thank you, Eric. We will be watching. But up here first, the number one fear of Americans right now, believe it or not, it's not another terror attack or crime. It's something to do with a government that could explain the anti-establishment rage in America.